We begin our video on equilibrium and hearing by comparing receptors. Olfactory receptors had specialized sensory neurons. Gustatory receptors communicate with sensory neurons. Photoreceptors respond to light, and both route information directly to the CNS. All are located in epithelia exposed to the external environment. Equilibrium and hearing receptors, however, are isolated and protected from the external environment, and they're located in the internal ear. Information is integrated and organized locally and forward to the central nervous system. We do see hair cells, and the hair cells are sensory receptors in the internal ear. Stereocilia are like long microvilli, and kinocilia is a single large cilium. Hair cells are mechanoreceptors. They're sensitive to movement, pressure, touch, and external force pushing on the hair cell process distorts the plasma membrane, and it allows a neurotransmitter to be released. It is a very complex three-dimensional structure in the internal ear, and we'll be looking at two different parts of that internal ear in terms of equilibrium. One part, the hair cells respond to gravity or acceleration, and in the other part, the hair cells respond to rotation or sound. So we start with the anatomy of the ear. The external ear collects and directs the sound waves toward the middle ear. This, what we call the ear, is the auricle, also sometimes called the pinna, and it is made of elastic cartilage. The opening here, the canal that goes to the eardrum, is called the external acoustic meatus, and it goes through the temporal bone. Here, inside here will be ceruminous glands. Ceruminous glands secrete waxy cerumen, which is earwax, and earwax keeps foreign objects out and it slows bacterial growth. Hairs inside the ear will trap debris. The outer ear ends at the eardrum, called the tympanic membrane. Just past the membrane is the tympanic cavity, which is air-filled. Inside the tympanic cavity are the auditory ossicles, the three tiny bones. And there is also a tube going from the middle ear to the pharynx. This is called the auditory tube. The tympanic membrane itself is thin, semi-transparent sheet that separates external ear from the middle ear. Here are the three auditory ossicles. An ossicle is a bone. They are called the malleus, the incus, and the stapes. Remember them in that order. The internal ear contains sensory organs for both hearing and equilibrium. It receives amplified sound waves from the middle ear, and it consists of this bony, snail-shaped object here called the bony labyrinth. Back to the auditory tube for a second in the middle ear. This auditory tube that connects the middle cavity to the pharynx allows organisms to grow up here and cause ear infections. Children have a very small tube. They often lay on their back a lot. The angle is a little different, and they get more middle ear infections. Otitis media is a middle ear infection. The purpose of this auditory tube is not to get infections. The purpose is to equalize pressures on both sides of the membrane. If you have pressure that is equal on both sides of the membrane, then the eardrum will vibrate correctly and you'll be able to hear sounds. But you know, if you dive down into water where it's a deeper pressure a greater pressure, the water pressure pushes in on the eardrum and sound becomes muffled. We can't hear well under those conditions. The three auditory ossicles are the malleus, which is the first one. The malleus attaches to the tympanic membrane. The incus is right in the middle. It attaches the malleus to the stapes, and the stapes attaches to a structure called the oval window. You will also see in this area of the middle cavity a tiny muscle called the tensor tympani, and that connects the malleus to the temporal bone. If there is a very loud noise, it will stiffen the membrane and reduce vibration. The stapedius muscle connects the stapes to the posterior wall of the middle ear, and that reduces stapes movement at the oval window. So these three little bones here have joints between them. So there is movement here. Sound waves come into the external acoustic meatus, vibrate the tympanic membrane just like if you hit a drum, the head of the drum will vibrate, and the sound waves are converted into mechanical movement. Then the movement of the drum will move the auditory ossicles, and those auditory ossicles will take that movement to the internal ear, all the way to the oval window. It focuses the sound on the oval window and increases it. Those tiny muscles inside the middle ear will contract under loud noise to prevent too much movement. So we're going to be talking now about the internal ear. Inside the inner ear is this bony structure called the bony labyrinth, and it is the tan color here. It's bone. Inside the tan color will be a membranous labyrinth. The whole thing is filled with fluid. Now there's two different names for the fluid. It will help to remember those names. So this circular diagram right here shows you what's going on here. Here's the outermost bony labyrinth, and inside is the membranous labyrinth. Well, the fluid is, there's fluid between the bony and the membranous labyrinth, and there's fluid inside the membranous labyrinth. So the innermost fluid is called the endolymph. Endo is inside, and the perilymph is outside that. In terms of the structures here, this snail-shaped region is called the cochlea. This is involved in hearing. These three circular structures are called the semicircular canals. This region in between is called the vestibule. The vestibule and the semicircular canals are involved in equilibrium and balance. The membranous labyrinth contains endolymph. Inside the membranous labyrinth will be the receptors for hearing and equilibrium. Three parts, the semicircular canals, the utricle, and the saccule, are part of the vestibular complex, which maintains equilibrium. So here is our utricle and the saccule, the semicircular ducts. These are all involved in equilibrium. The semicircular ducts have receptors that are stimulated by rotation of the head. Within the vestibule are the utricle and saccule. and they respond to linear acceleration and gravity. So the round semicircular ducts are for rotation. The vestibule, which is like the hallway in the middle, responds to gravity and acceleration. And then finally, within the cochlea is the cochlear duct, and that is stimulated by sound. Here are the three semicircular canals, and they and the utricle and saccule respond to rotational motion. And the vestibule, we'll see the ampullas in the vestibule respond to gravity and linear acceleration, and then the cochlea responds to hearing. So there are four parts of the membranous labyrinth. Remember, it's just like the bony labyrinth. There are the semicircular canals. There are the utricle and saccule. And these are part of the vestibular complex, which monitors equilibrium. The cochlear is responsible for hearing. So we'll see hair cells. Hair cells in the semicircular ducts respond to rotation. Hair cells in the utricle and saccule respond to gravity and linear acceleration. We don't need to worry about the three ducts. Really, it's just this whole thing is just the semicircular canals. But at the base of each semicircular canal is what's called an ampulla, and that's where the sensory receptors are, inside that ampulla. That ampulla is a gelatinous structure, and it has hair cells in there. So you can see those hair cells. When we move our head in a plane of the duct, it moves the endolymph, and the endolymph inside the membrane will push the ampulla to one side, distorting those hair cells, causing an action potential. Horizontal rotation stimulates one duct, nodding another duct, and tilting the head to the side stimulates the third duct. This is called rotational motion. The utricle and the saccule provide equilibrium sensations whether the body is stationary or moving. Now these, you don't need to worry about these endolymphatic sacs, that sort of thing. So here is this fellow with his head straight up. So inside the receptors are hair cells. There are also tiny little bones called otoliths. I missed this slide here. The otoliths here are made of calcium carbonate, but little stones. Oto is ear and lith is stone. So these are in the utricle and saccule, and so they're not moving at all when the head is upright. But he tilts his head back, and it causes the otolith to distort those hair cells. And that sends an action potential saying that the head is tilted backwards. We are moving on to hearing, and that will be another video.